Today, I'm happy to be joined by Stephanie Stradley, who is writing about the Texans for the Houston Chronicle online since 2006, and is a lawyer with the Stradley Law Firm here in Houston. Thank you so much for joining, Stephanie. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to start off our interview here. I just want to ask you: have you ever had the chance to talk to Deshaun Watson?
Yes, I have. I was at his introductory press conference. I was at the draft party when his name was announced. And I mean, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around all the things that have happened since that draft.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've been looking at Deshaun, as a star player here, as a star quarterback, someone that I really enjoyed having here. And I think it was, kind of unfortunate how it had to go down this route. But, for someone like me, a high school kid, or other people like me, I think, some of us do have a little bit of trouble understanding kind of like the legal side of things
Sure.
here in the Watson case. So you think you could like break down some of the next steps that could be happening and like what the process was until now?
Sure. He had a number of serious claims against him, serious claims that are disputed. What is not in doubt, and something that everybody your age and other ages should know, is that when people interact with each other, those interactions need to be professional and consensual. And there's claims in this situation that he behaved in non-consensual ways with other people, and he denies that. And so the way it started off was there were civil claims, and now a civil claim is for money damages. It doesn't mean you go to jail. It means that the people who you've agreed, just generally, the people that say that you did them wrong want money damages. Then there's criminal cases. A criminal case means that the government, not an individual, says that you did something criminally wrong. And then the NFL has its own discipline policies, and the NFL can decide if there's credible evidence that certain activities happened, right? So this particular situation is really difficult because you're dealing with a lot of different legal issues all at the same time. And what happened recently is the criminal case apparently came to an end, that it went in front of something called a grand jury. And the grand jury are people in your community that look at a lot of different cases. Like, they weren't just looking at this case, they look at lots of cases, and they're to determine whether there's probable cause that a crime was committed. And the way that works is they can look at all different types of evidence, not just evidence that's allowed to go in front of the court. They can, the prosecutor, who in this case is somebody that is pretty well respected by both prosecutors, who are the people that bring claims against people who have committed crimes, and is also respected by defense lawyers. Those are the people that defend people who are accused of crimes. And he wasn't charged with the crime, he was being investigated. And so the prosecutor brought the evidence in front of the grand jury that the police department investigated. And the police investigate the facts as they find them. And that information was put in front of the grand jury. Locally, they're allowed, the prosecutor sometimes will go, hey, defense, do you have any information that would be helpful for the grand jury to make their decision? And in cases like this, a lot of times defense lawyers will give that information so they can provide both sides of the story. Now, I will say it's unusual for a case to be a civil case first and then being a criminal case, because it's the information from the civil case can sometimes make it hard to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So some of the information that comes from that just can be a barrier to bringing a case. Like, I know that this is kind of hard to describe now, but now that the criminal case is done, the NFL may do more of their investigation that they've done already, because there's no worries that criminal charges are going to be brought against them, but there's still all those civil cases out there. And the legal process goes very, very slow, and slower now that, COVID has slowed down the courts even more. And so I know that there's a lot of people that wanted the civil cases to be settled, and settlement is a way, and it's used a lot of times in cases like this where both parties can decide what an appropriate resolution can be to a situation, and it gives the parties control on how they come to a resolution. But it takes two sides to want to settle a case, and it sounded like he wanted to go to the Dolphins and was willing to settle the case to go to Miami, but not all of the people bringing claims against him wanted to settle. And, in cases like this, sometimes some cases have to go to trial, that it's more than money and they want to preserve their reputations. But frankly, it's a very difficult situation for everyone, because there's a lot of things that are speculated on publicly that might not be fair, because the lawyers can't necessarily share everything that they know about a case. Once a civil case is filed, the lawyers have an ethical obligation not to do pretrial publicity except for very narrow circumstances. And there can be any number of reasons why we might not know the full story of the case. But it's important for us to take it very seriously, because claims like this are very serious. But it's also important that everybody is entitled to their own representation and having attorneys to represent their interests. I don't know. Do you think that explained it very well? And if you have any questions about any of that, I would love to help out with
No,
that.
no, that was great. So I just want to confirm here. So like, if he's found like guilty of any of these civil case charges, he won't go to jail, right? He would just have to.
He doesn't go to jail, and it's not called being guilty. It's, a judge looks at the evidence, there's a jury there, and then the jury determines where it was more likely than not which side wins based on the evidence in front of them. And there's a number of different cases, and each of these cases are going to be tried separately, even though what's called discovery is done beforehand, and some of that's being combined. And discovery is a number of different ways where each side can find out information about the other side. So there's something like, you've probably heard of something called a deposition. And a deposition is where one side gets to ask the other side a number of questions about what happened relating to the claims being made. And so the women are called, in a civil case, are called the plaintiffs, and Deshaun Watson in this case is called the defendant. And they basically they ask questions of each other, written questions, and then they can do these depositions where they can ask a number of different questions to find out more information from the case. And then all of that evidence, including some evidence that or some things that they might have like found out on their own on the side, all of these things come to the trial, and then evidence that is allowed to be heard by the jury is heard by the jury. And then 12 people in the community decide, what is the best answer. And, we might not find out about that for a long time, because trials take a long time to get to their conclusion.
Yeah, and it's been said that Deshaun, he could be facing a suspension. Like, I think the NFL is separate in this, right? I mean, would the length of that suspension depend on any of the civil cases, or is that like completely separate?
I think it's completely separate. The way that the NFL works with these cases has evolved over the years, but the general proposition is that it is a privilege to work for the NFL, and that their standard of conduct is higher than what the legal system looks at. And so what they have is they have a specific group for the NFL that is supposed to be trained in finding out and investigating these situations. They used to do it completely with outside counsel, but they've tried to rework things over the years. The difficulty with that is, in my personal opinion, the NFL is better at doing football than it's is at doing legal investigations, and there's already been some claim made that the NFL was not sensitive in the way that they were questioning the plaintiffs in this case. It's hard to say from the outside, but it's very like to me, cooperating for the NFL, I don't understand why anybody would do it, because they don't get any benefit from it other than knowing that, you know, their employer could do something against that person. But under what is called the collective bargaining agreement, that is the agreement between the NFL and the players. There's a process for figuring out discipline of players in all number of situations, including this one. The NFL said they are investigating this, but they have a lot of flexibility as to what kind of punishment that they can do. Even under the new CBA, Roger Goodell has a lot of ability to do what he wants to do. And the way that he the standard is, do they find credible evidence that this happened? And they're not just restricted to what the women are claiming. You know, there have been cases in the past where if the commissioner has decided that a player has not cooperated enough in it, then, you know, that can be grounds for disciplining a player. So, I mean, we're not quite at that point yet. At this point, they have said that they have not finished their investigation. I don't know when they're going to finish their investigation, but at this point, all I know from any kind of high profile case, there's the information we know, the information that we agree on. There's a lot of assumptions that people make, and sometimes, you know, they're trying to argue one way or another. But there's a lot of facts that we may not know at this point because of just the nature of the litigation process, that lawyers are not, sometimes don't share everything all at once for any number of reasons. You know, maybe they're not sharing information because they're still trying to get a settlement. Maybe they're not sharing information because it might be mutually embarrassing to share that information. There's any number of things that we may not know about. And I think at the end of the day, as outsiders, we should try to talk very respectfully about it. It's been difficult for me because I think a lot of times people don't talk respectfully about these situations. And it hurts. It hurts people because it hurts the people at the center of this. And it also hurts people how people talk about it. It's like, oh, do you talk about all women that way? Do you talk about all accused people that way? And everybody has their own experiences that they bring to it. And hopefully we'll get some answers or some resolution at this point. But at this point, all the Browns have said is, well, we've done our own investigation and we're satisfied with it and we're going forward. But it's not finished for Deshaun Watson, but it's no longer Houston's issue. It's the Browns' issue now.
Right. And I think, you know, that when the grand jury on March 11th, they declined to indict Watson, were you surprised with that decision? Or was that kind of typical that they quickly decide on that?
You know, I wasn't that surprised by it because in a lot of sexual assault cases, the defense lawyers will try to win at that time. Like, we'll try to give as much information to the prosecutors and police at that time because they know that just being charged with a serious sexual offense can be devastating to your career and to your life. And they want to make sure that there's full information out there from their perspective. But the standard of review of like whether a criminal charge is brought is fairly low. Is like, you know, is there probable cause a crime was committed? And from the view of Watson's lawyer, he's saying, hey, this is a civil offense. They brought civil charges first. they're wanting money. And, just, it is much more difficult for prosecutors to prosecute a case when there is a civil case first, because at time of trial, they have to show that the person is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a really high standard, and it should be, because you're putting somebody in prison, right? So that is a real high standard. Well, just saying, hey, these people are looking for money, and there are civil claims and so forth, that can lead to some reasonable doubt. But I mean, there is a lot of claims. But aside from that, the hardest part from the outside is that the grand jury process is a secret process. So the prosecutor can't say, well, this is the way that the grand jury decided. And the grand jurors themselves can't say, this is the information that we looked at, because they're not allowed under law to say that. And it's really kind of difficult for them, because people on the outside, because it's a high profile case, are saying this, that, and the other thing, and they can't correct the record one way or another. But in this particular jurisdiction, it is likely that the grand jury saw a lot of things, because, it's such a high profile case. The district attorney's office is going to make sure that whatever information is out there, the grand jury has it. And, people will read different things into it, like, oh, well, this means it didn't happen. And it's like, it doesn't mean that that didn't happen. It just may mean that they don't see it from the evidence that they've seen, that it rises to the level of a crime. I mean, it's a process where the standard is so low. It may have been one of those things where teams wanted to make sure that whatever the event was, it wasn't going to be a criminal offense. And at least in this jurisdiction, it's not being treated that way.
All right, I see. And I want to talk about the Deshaun Watson trade specifically, but were you surprised that, did you think that the Texans would receive more than what they got? Because personally, I thought that, it seemed to me that the Texans might receive a potential second round pick or a possible young player, but they did get the 3 first-round picks, which is great, obviously. And I think today they added a couple more picks. I think the Texans, they gave a 6th-round pick to the Browns, and then we received, I think, an additional 4th-round pick. But did the return seem less to you?
Well, I think the biggest difficulty is it's a negotiation, right? So in any kind of negotiation, there is something called leverage. You know what leverage is?
Not really.
Okay, so leverage is one of those things where you have some power over the other person on something that person cares about, and that they don't have control over it. So in this particular situation, there were different leverage points, but the biggest leverage point was when Deshaun Watson signed his original contract, he got a no trade clause, which means that he has to approve where he goes. And when the GM situation was announced, he obviously did not like, he didn't like how that was handled. And, there's been all sorts of speculation with that. And he hasn't ever publicly talked about it, but it was pretty clear that he no longer wanted to be a Houston Texan. And there was a lot of people that were surprised, that they thought, hey, this New England stuff is done. We're going to get a fresh start with new people at the top. And that partially happened. And so he let it be known that he did not want to stay. Then we had Andre Johnson saying his tweet, which is, nothing good has happened since Jack Easterby was in the building. And then shortly after that, we found out about the first claim and then multiple claims. Well, at some point, you hear about people saying, hey, people need a change of scenery. And part of that is a lack of trust. And it's pretty clear that Deshaun Watson didn't fully trust the direction of the Houston Texans. And frankly, the Houston Texans didn't fully trust Deshaun Watson, because whatever he was accused of, there are expectations for everybody's role, and the expectations for a franchise quarterback is to not get into circumstances where you could get into trouble. And even under his version of events, he was acting in ways that were probably not responsible in interacting with a bunch of strangers where he could get this kind of accusation against him. Like, that is agreed, right? So there's a mutual lack of trust. So once it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be here anymore, it's hard to figure out, okay, who has the assets that the Texans want, and who wants this player who has all these things hanging over his head and they need to deal with it. And then all the uncertainty of how the civil cases are going to come out, because it could come out with the civil cases, like the facts go where the facts go. And the civil cases could come out saying that he did all of these things. And so some other team has to take that on and have comfort that A, it didn't happen, and B, it wouldn't happen again. So it's really hard to figure out the trade value of somebody who is objectively good at football, but is accused of atrocious things. So you are very limited where you could trade him, because you would have to find the right trade partner who has the right assets. Plus, Deshaun Watson had veto power because he had a no trade clause. I mean, the name of the agency that represents him is Athletes First. Athletes First. And everybody has a different way of viewing business. But the way that this, in the NFL, the players don't have as much power over their money and where they go to as they do in some other sports. Like, you're traded, like when you're drafted, you're just drafted to whatever team gets you.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a responsibility that that team needs to run itself in a professional way. So this is the only time that he was going to have in the near future to decide where he was going to go and how much money he was going to get. And normally there is not this much guaranteed money. And he was able to leverage a very ugly situation and make money on it. I mean, it's extraordinarily unusual for the league, but in the NFL, if you don't have a competent quarterback, you don't have much of a chance. And so that makes people make crazy big decisions like this. I mean, there are some franchises that haven't had a good quarterback in decades. And so that's why people are willing to take chances, and every team has a different comfort level of how much comfort do they have to have about his background and whether something will happen with the civil cases. Now, with the criminal cases, the lawyers don't really have very much control over it. And it's up to 12 jury members in a secret room to decide whether the case was going to proceed. And there's a lot of uncertainty that comes from criminal cases. With civil cases, there still is a lot of uncertainty, but the lawyers have a little bit more control of it. And from at least public reports, Watson's lawyers shared what information they had, and it rose to the level, at least, that these teams felt comfortable with it, and how they communicate that to their fans and how Deshaun Watson directly communicates that to others. We're going to see how that works out.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland, they're willing to take on Deshaun. Obviously, he comes with a lot of baggage, I think, those 22 civil cases. And I think a lot of fans, I think especially in Cleveland, maybe are not going to be happy with the Browns' decision to trade for him. You were mentioning like the Browns, they said that they took an extensive look at it, at background. They did a lot of work to come to that decision. But, I think some fans in Cleveland, maybe aren't going to support the team because of this. And It's really hard to find an elite quarterback, and you're mentioning that teams are just, they're willing to take that risk, I guess. And you also,
Yeah, it involves a lot of trust. You're having to trust the leaders of an organization that they actually took this seriously, and what that information is, right? But every fan feels their own way about these sorts of things and the uncertainty with it. And, that's going to be something that they have to navigate. And, the Texans had to navigate it last year in kind of an awkward way, but they went forward saying that he was not playing for the team, at least, while these criminal charges were outstanding. They really didn't talk about their reasoning too much, but I think part of it is it was pretty evident early that they only want people who want to be Houston Texans, and he did not want it for whatever reason. Like, there's all sorts of speculation about that, but that is key. You need to have a quarterback that is one of the leaders of your team, and if they don't feel like they can lead that team, they shouldn't be there. And there's a lot of mutual trust involved with that, and people knowing what their roles are supposed to be at every level of the team.
right. I think I'm just happy that, personally, I think in Houston that we kind of moved on from all that. I think the pathway, I think, for the Texans now has gotten much more clear. I think now you have Davis Mills as quarterback, for at least, this coming year, and then you have 10 draft picks this year. You have the number 3 pick now, the number 13 pick. I think I'm really excited for who the Texans are going to be drafting, and obviously I'm big on Davis Mills, and I hope he can, be a starting quarterback for the Texans. But um, is there something about, Davis Mills or this team that, that you really look forward to, for next season?
Well, yeah, I would have to say that 2021 was kind of a mixed bag. There was a lot of like strange things that happened with players, being suspended for games, players leaving and maybe not saying the best things about the team. You fired your head coach after 1 year. But I would say the one positive thing that came out of last year was, Nick Caserio has a long history of drafting players and figuring out contracts and figuring out how to construct a roster. And the draft picks from top to bottom, like even though he didn't have, high picks, that was a good draft. Like like if you look at it in a retrospective way, most people look at last year's draft as being good. So this year he has many more assets to work with. And then I guess the question is, in 2022, can they make it more about football? And I think part of that, part of that is like Lovie Smith being announced for the team and knowing that he needs to mend fences with people. And if you noticed at his press conference, all these great Houston players of the past showed up and supported him. And he talked about all the things that they needed to do in the upcoming year, including recognizing that fans may not be on board with what they've been doing, but that they need to earn the fans back, and made a point of it. And one of the things that I found striking is Lovie Smith has been doing this a long time. He is definitely a football professional. He's used to talking to people like football professionals. He's used to being part of press conferences and answering difficult questions in a way that doesn't insult people. And so he's trying to make that connection back with the fans that really, with all the awkwardness and strangeness that has happened in the last year, that press conference was about football. Now, Davis Mills, he did remarkable things given that they really didn't have the best scheme in the world. The offensive line coaching probably wasn't meshed very well with the scheme that they were running. He didn't have, he had some skill positions to work with, but he didn't have a running game. The defense tried the best that they could, but sometimes they'd run out of gas in the second half. And really, they did pretty remarkable things given some of the limitations that they had on their roster. And that whole year, they played hard. And I can tell you from the beginning of the Houston Texans to now, this is a team that has always played hard. Now, have they always played smart? Have they always used all the resources they can to, get to the next level? Well, that's what Nick Casario's job is. That's what Lovie Smith's job is. And hopefully they can help rebuild trust with the fan base because, frankly, if you're firing a guy after 1 year and you're having all sorts of strange decisions made in games and you have a lot of people in positions where they haven't shown previous success, it's hard to kind of get behind that. And really, at some point, I just recently went to NASA and I got to sit in mission control, and they showed how mission control looked when they first sent men to the moon. And that happened in Houston, Texas. Technically, Clear Lake is, I guess is Webster. Webster's where NASA is. But they sent men to the moon with less computing power than in an iPhone.
Wow.
They did that, working together, knowing that failure was not an option. And that's what Houston, Texas is about. And I think that's a possibility for this team, but they just need to have all one page, one leadership, one voice, one direction. And this team loves, this city loves football. The state loves football. This team is named after us. It needs to reflect what we're capable of, and which is a lot. It's a lot. We can do this. It's just, I think that there's some tiredness of belt. Like, we need to stay patient. We need to stay patient. I think, they do need to work hard. They need to work hard, and they need to work smarter, and they need to work together. Everybody has their role, has their job. And if they're led in the right way and they have the resources to thrive, Houston's a good place where anything's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely hope my Texans can, be better next season. And I just got a couple of, I think just two more questions for you.
Sure.
How did you get into sports, and more specifically the Texans? Like, was being like in the sports business something you wanted to do?
Well, when I was your age, that wasn't even in my conception of something that was even possible. Like, I've been a sports fan as long as I can remember thinking. My parents had a magazine subscription to Sports Illustrated, and back in the day there was like 3 TV channels. So I was a big reader, and I read lots of sports, and I watched lots of sports with my family, and I moved all over the country because my dad was in the Air Force. And I moved to Houston in the middle of Love You Blue, with the height of the Oilers.
Oh, wow.
And, Earl Campbell. And, it was neat hearing Bum Phillips later talk about the connection that those teams had with the city. Because, those guys didn't make very much money. So like a lot of them had summer jobs, and they were part of the community, and, they didn't succeed to the next level. But it was an exciting time to be a sports fan. And then when the Oilers left, if you've lived in a city that has a professional sports team, there's nothing like it. And when they left, it was just like, okay, I love the NFL, but like, who's my team? And I thought it was impossible we would get a team back. And then we did. And it was interesting to me to see it built from the ground floor, because the Texans had to try harder because they didn't have any natural fans. Some people just gave up on the NFL after they left town. Some went to become Titans fans or Cowboys fans or anything. Like, they've had to earn every single fan that they want. And this city wants a successful team. So it's been interesting to me see it from the start. But like, the way I started writing about sports was a complete accident. I'm a fan. I'm just like you. I started writing for the Chronicle as a fan blogger, mostly because there was a really great Astros blog. And I'm like, I would like to have a Texans blog so that people could talk about the things that I'm interested in talking about and learn more about the team. And then it just went from there. But I was just like, I never thought that I would do any sports related things. It was just more of an interest in really kind of filling niches. Like, I don't really write as much about the team as I used to, because there's other people that do it now with the kind of the rise of the internet. We're having this conversation right now. So really, the way I figure it is, I just try to help encourage other people, with whatever sports stuff that they want to know about. And so I've tried to fill the niche and kind of create the conversation that maybe isn't happening at that moment, or letting people know about opportunities that they might not know about relating to the Texans or any number of things in the Houston area. Like, my view of the internet is this: it makes the world so much smaller. Like, we're having this conversation now, and when I was your age, I couldn't fathom that. Like, this is really cool. Like, ooh, and like girls having, any kind of career in sports, like that didn't seem like a realistic option, like, at all. When I was your age, and it wasn't something that I even really thought about it all. But the way that the internet works is, it makes the world a lot smaller. And if everybody brings their specific skills to the table, it makes our communities better. So there's all sorts of communities. There's the general sports community in Houston. There's individual communities like Texans and Rockets, and there's any number of things. But like, the best things that we have ever done in Houston have been together as one. Like, for example, JJ Watt bringing people from all over the world to help Houston and our region after Hurricane Harvey, because you just felt like you couldn't do anything. And so finding areas where you can help is a big difference. And you have been a part of that. You ask people, interview questions, and that's how we all learn. Like, we all learn by asking people things that we don't know about, that we're curious about. And I have to say, I started writing, 2006 is just kind of like, well, I know about this subject, maybe I can help. And things evolved over time, where, I'm doing different things that surprise me. But really, it's just all about, how can you help? How can you bring your talents to help other people? And sometimes it's really hard to know how to help. Like, right now in this moment, do I want the Houston Texans to succeed? Yeah. How is the best way of doing that? How is the best way to help? Like, how do I talk about things in truthful ways without making things worse? And over the years, the Texans have been pretty good as an organization to try to be very responsive to fans. Like, it used to be that people, like, they would go out of their way to make things good for fans. Like, if there was an issue with, like, can I give you an example? Long time ago, there was this great fan who was standing in the bullpen part of the Houston Texans, and he was standing up, and somebody behind him wanted him to sit down. And he's like, I'm in the bullpen, we're supposed to stand up. And the usher didn't realize that, that's how the bullpen was. And so they made him leave. It's like, he's like a great fan. And so that was kind of an issue. And it's like, okay, well, how can we fix this issue? And so people came together, and fans talked to people in the front office. And so, how the front office figured out how to deal with this? They sent out something to the people in the bullpen saying, this is an area where people stand up, and they're allowed to stand up. And the ushers will know that they're allowed to stand up and encouraged to stand up. And if you don't want to sit in the stand-up area, we will reseat you to someplace else. And I could give you lots and lots of stories where they don't want you to, like, this is the problem, and I want to tell everybody the problem they have. They deal with the problem, and they deal with it as as people, like, it's a fan business. Sports is supposed to be fun, and hopefully they regain all that connection that they've had with fans, because I think one of the difficulties is people feel a whole bunch of different ways, and you can't tell people how to feel. Like, I could tell you, hey, this is happening, and you're going to feel any number of different ways about this, that, or the other thing happening. And really, at this point, the fans need to make peace with the team, and the team needs to make peace with the fans, but it's really the team's obligation to do so.
Yeah, I mean,
Build that trust.
yeah, I appreciate you telling, all those stories, about how you got into it. That's really awesome. And, last question for you. I noticed that I saw in your story, I was reading that you were on like the show, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like in 2001, if I'm correct. And you won like, I think $64,000 or something.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you think you can tell me, how that experience was? Because I think that's really cool.
Oh, wow. That actually was a very meaningful experience to me. I had just stopped, I practiced law for companies for years, and I had taken a break for that because I had a kid and I could work with my husband and have flexibility with my job. And there was something in the Houston Chronicle saying Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was doing auditions, and you could take a test, and I wasn't going to do it because I didn't have a babysitter. And my mother-in-law goes, "You're going to be great at this. You're going to go take that test. You're going to get on the show and you're going to win. And I'm going to babysit your kid." And so that's what happened. Like, it happened exactly the way that she said. Now, it was a scary experience for me, a lot. But when I got to the other side of it, I just realized, you know what? You can't win unless you try. You can't win unless you try. And, whatever happens in it, it's more meaningful to me than anybody else. So it was kind of freeing to not be afraid and to just go, you know what, I can do this. And that's what I've pretty much done since. It was a great experience being it. I mean, it was like they flew me out there. I had 1 week from the time that they called me to when I went out there. It was right after 9/11 had happened, and it was strange flying into New York City and not seeing the Twin Towers there. But it was just a different time, and it feels like yesterday and a million years ago. And it's kind of funny because in the broadcast, he asks about this new football team, the Houston Texans, and I was really excited. I had ticket. It was the first time I'd ever gotten season tickets to a sports team, because before that, I when I was younger, I couldn't afford any of that. And, there's only, 8 home games, and it was going to be something that my best friend and I could, we could get away for 8 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey. I appreciate the time. And, I kind of took, sorry about the time, but
No worries. I'm
yeah.
just you keep on trying all the things that you're trying. Like, you learn a lot of things doing this, and really, the more you can do, the more you can do. There's so many different avenues in getting into sports. Whether it's law, whether it's journalism, whether it's being an athlete. But the more you do, the more you can do. So I'm really impressed with you putting this together and going forward with this. And I'm encouraged to see more of it.
Thank you so much, for the support. And it was a great talking, and, talking about the Watson case and, all that. So, I appreciate it. And hopefully I can have you on sometime in the future as well.
I appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And you have a good night.
You too.
Bye.